I do love all of the stats about Fidel just being. I like. Well, I mean, like Fidel apparently had a pretty decent, shot some minor league action.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Yeah,
but we're not interested in Cuba necessarily for Fidel's baseball prowess. We want to talk about what they're doing right now. Wait, Matt has the quote.
I have the quote. It was
let's do that first.
It was Henry Kissinger said they were looking at satellite imagery. Those soccer fields could mean war, Bob. Kissinger said Cubans play baseball, Russians play soccer.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Not well.
Yeah. So one thing, one thing Cuba does very well is baseball, which, by the way, I mean, just to spend like 30 more seconds on that before we switch gears, like some, an earlier article I wrote for Jacobin was about public ownership of sports teams. And I know there are people who are skeptical that you can do that and still have cultivate talent and have like enough incentive, for the best players to want to play. And, this does seem like a relevant example for that argument, but I would also say like something else they've been very, very good at, honestly, and really good when you start thinking about the resources and the situation of that island is tackling COVID. Mm-hmm. Like for a long time, a morbid little game that I would play is I would Google first the total number of COVID deaths in the county in Michigan where I come from, and then the total number of COVID deaths in the entire island of Cuba, which obviously has many, many times more people. And for the longest time, I was like running even, or like or Ingham County would be ahead of Cuba, and it's a small thing, and you can argue, all right, it's an island, so there's certain advantages there, but also we can look at Puerto Rico is an island, that's not a guarantee that that you're going to do well there. Look at the COVID deaths there. It's pretty grim. And I think that if you look even very early in the crisis, like if you look at about a year ago exactly, and they were already at the time when you could not order a face mask for love or money in the United States. They were widely distributed in Cuba because they would just have nationalized factories that normally put out school uniforms or whatever, and they just repurpose them to making tons of masks. And lately they're actually tested out 2 of their own homegrown vaccines, which is just incredible when you keep in mind, and this is always the thing, I couldn't, it drove me crazy last year during the primary when there was all this ginned up pseudo controversy about Bernie Sanders would say 2 critical things about Cuba, and then in the middle he'd say yeah, but they do a good job at X, Y, and Z, and people would just go nuts over that, oh my God, Bernie Sanders is praising it because the rules are different for Cuba than any other country. Every American president has found something nice to say about Saudi Arabia, but suggesting that there are any upsides to Cuban society, is just totally off the table. But look, they're doing they're testing out 2 of their own vaccines. This is a tiny country that has been under embargo from its largest natural trading partner for decades, which, by the way, I know there's a lot of mythology about how it's okay though, because you can't really blame the embargo for anything because they can trade with Canada and Europe. There is a lot of medical technology that that you cannot get if you're under embargo.
And the vaccine in particular is really exposing that.
Yeah.
Where you're seeing a reminder, as Leo Panich would remind people in Canada all the time, that Canada is a colony of the United States in a lot of ways, right? When you see how the difference in distribution of the vaccine, and I think Matt and I are planning on doing a whole Canada deep dive with some guests in the near future. Not that the local governments and Trudeau and all them don't have, a lot of blame to go their way. But the fact is, the United States has access, and we're going to kick everybody's ass when it comes to, I mean, not Cuba, even, but like a lot of other countries when it comes to vaccination. It's literally just because of imperial power that we have this ability that other countries don't.
And I think like the success of the vaccines in this country, it's very, I think, just from a messaging perspective, useful that Cuba is proving that it can also be done outside of having these massive monopolies like Pfizer, trusting to them. I think it has been a pretty big coup for them.
No, absolutely. I mean, which should make sense anyway, because like our big vaccines, I guess Pfizer, it wasn't mostly American, money, but
Right.
but like in the Moderna was, and like in both cases, I mean, these are like the government, various governments were actually funding the research. We just privatized the profits, of course, because that's how that works. So yeah, absolutely. The fact that it is that in Cuba, again, this tiny resource strapped island, but I think Fidel kind of decided in the 80s, that like it seemed like a good idea for Cuba to focus on biotech, and they've done absolutely incredible things there. And you don't have to bend the stick too far the other way, and pretend that Cuba should be above criticism. But I mean, for God's sake, these are like incredible achievements.
It's so funny the way that they cover, I'm going to make this point quick and then get back to the vaccines. Like the way that they were able to mitigate the virus in the first place, right, is always presented in like the most sinister way, right? It's like, well, Cuba could prevent the virus because they could surveil people, and people were scared, and they had a lot
you can't
of
do that
social
here.
control, right? Which is ironic when so many liberals were like celebrating South Korea and their early response to the virus, and like, oh, well, look what can happen, or New Zealand, right? Their abilities to do that for a lot of different historical and political reasons. But again, as you're saying, Cuba, this like cash-strapped island nation, has because what they mean by that, by the way, when they say like strict rules, is like a kind of sense of like patriotism and like understanding of that, like we're all in it together, that people were willing to do things like self-report and to self-quarantine and all that, right? Like that is like, that blends into culture, but hell, all these things are produced by society. I think sometimes Marxists like have a weird thing when they try to talk about culture as something that's like completely separate from the state and the economy, which is not accurate. It's not even a Marxist reading, right? Like you have a culture like that that develops out of certain things. But then too, the vaccine is an important point because, one of our favorite people and inspirations, Bill Gates, has been making this argument that like, oh, you can't release the patents.
Well, he's making
because they're people in global South countries like aren't going to be able to like they won't be able to figure it out.
They don't understand it.
There's no logic to his argument, because he's like, we can't release them because they couldn't build them anyway. Well, it's like, then you could release them and there would be frankly no harm done. There'd be no good done, but I guess there'd be no harm done. But some reporting has proved that he's lying about the capacity issue too. Like people could produce these vaccines if this stuff was open, which it should be.
And I did a very bend style argument there. It's like, one, I think is BS, right? But if the fact is that other countries can't produce the vaccine, right, and there's some other knowledge sharing or maybe even resource sharing that is necessary to do that, then let's do it, right? It's like the argument falls apart very quickly. It's just a cheap excuse it's just like, it's what technocrats, not to derail this too much, but it's like the kind of argument that technocrats love to do. Is like, oh, well, you think this is absurd and evil? Let me obscure it so much, right? And act like I'm the only one who understands this subject so that I can, argue against something that is extremely clear to people, which is that a plan for building a vaccine that could prevent a global pandemic, releasing that to the globe is a good thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Not releasing that to the globe. Sorry.
Yeah, which had also, by the way, like just to continue on the point, like damn well that Cuban vaccine, like if those are like go through the final stages of approval. I think they're not quite done, with all the stages yet. The damn well that those are going everywhere. In fact, those are going to go everywhere with Cuban doctors, like administering them, because that's how they do it, and it just seems like, it's one thing to say, Cuba, certainly as a democratic socialist, there are various things about that society that I criticize, but one, I think pretending that the human rights record is like anywhere near as bad as lots of countries in the United States, props up is ludicrous. Yeah. But two, again, you just it's so weird and childish to pretend that this isn't that there aren't incredible accomplishments, that have been that have been carried out, by the society. And I guess the one reason, I kind of wanted to harp on this a little bit, is that I think it's something that, as Americans, we sort of think about it when something comes up, especially if it somehow comes up in American politics, like it did last year. But I think it's something that hasn't gotten a lot of play, even on the left. But this is an aspect of Biden's, record in his month so far that's particularly indefensible. That there's been nothing like Obama at least was starting to open up to Cuba, at the end, and the Biden administration has just shown no interest whatsoever so far in really doing that.
Well, they've literally been asked. There's a video you can see of the new press secretary. Yeah, and we'll get to her maybe later, but being asked if they think if it's a priority for the Biden administration to take Cuba off of the state sponsors of terrorism list.
Yeah, right? which is something that the Trump administration did literally a week before they left office. They put it on this list. The rationalization they used was just kind of incoherent on its face. Like they said. Basically, what they said is that, there are people who are accused of things that fall into the category of terrorism in Colombia and in the United States, who are in Cuba who haven't been extradited. Therefore, it's a state sponsor of terrorism. Which
I thought they also had a Venezuela hook in there too.
Oh yeah, I think there is, but it's one. You can't. The fact that a country doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States cannot possibly.
Why do you think Cuba doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States?
Yeah, that's an interesting question if you know absolutely zero about any of this.
You literally are born yesterday.
Well, that's the thing. And so that's number two, right? So first of all, not having an extradition treaty with the United States is not a good enough reason to be listed as state sponsor of terrorism. But two, that lack of an extradition treaty, it cuts both ways. There are plenty of people walking around totally free in Miami right now who have committed acts of terrorism, bombings, assassinations in Cuba, and you can make a way better case for state sponsorship in that direction.
What's the official tally? Do either of y'all know? Matt might, just because of his JFK interest, of the amount of assassination attempts against Fidel by the CIA. It's insane.
It depends, I think, at how serious you take some of them, because it was we'll try to fill up his the radio station he's in with aerosolized LSD or an exploded cigar. I mean, multiple attempts on his life. Yeah.
And I don't want to necessarily spend too much time on this, but I just think it's really important to remember that trying to build a society under these conditions does not it's just it's like gardening, man. You know what I mean? It's it's not the best conditions to to do everything, by the book. Doesn't mean you have to excuse everything or say there's things that are beyond, criticism. I think sometimes, some people are a little too timid when it comes to Cuba. In the sense of they're too willing to accept criticisms of Cuba than they should be. I think there are some things we should be able to hold firm on, while also being able to say there's a richer democratic society that we would like to all be able to live under socialism in Cuba or the United States or wherever, right? But that being said, you live in a society where you're just trying to give people health care and do some basic kind of development, not in the United States, like dictation.
Yeah.
And you have like over 100 like actual attempts, not just like alleged, but like actual attempts to, to assassinate the leader of your country. Again, this is not the, the cradle that's going to birth, the most perfect society. And it's unbelievable and an incredible testament to the spirit of Cuban socialism, the society that they have today, Well,
it's also like, I mean, like, incarceration is bad and it's indicative of something wrong. I think we agree on that. But America incarcerates as many people as China plus India, roughly, like total. That's not even to get per capita. So like, it is bizarre to think of like what leg do we have to stand on?
Yeah,
and if Biden wants to keep going on this, I just want to make a personal plug here. If Biden wants to keep going and plugging on this idea of Cuba not being a model for democracy in the globe, hilarious, disgusting, blah blah. But let's take him at his word. Let's start pressuring Joe Biden to release Leonard Peltier, who is by any standard a political prisoner in the United States, somebody who has been proven time and time again to not be guilty of the crimes that he has, that he has been imprisoned for. In fact, the United States prosecutor who prosecuted the case against Leonard Peltier has been pleading with Obama and then with Trump to free Leonard Peltier because he says what we did was a crime against democracy and, more importantly, a crime against Native peoples, and most explicitly a crime against Leonard Peltier, right? If Joe Biden wants to start talking this talk, right, start pressuring him to do stuff here domestically, because there's a lot that he can be doing, and freeing Leonard Peltier is one of them. If he's worried about political repression for speech and political actions, then take it seriously and free somebody who's been in prison for decades now for a crime that he did not commit.
Yeah, and if I could just like two more quick things to the Cuba point, just one. Also, by the way, if we're doing the balance sheet on Cuba, I think that the role like the military role that Cuba played in defeating apartheid in South Africa, I mean, like that's one of the most important achievements for human freedom in the 20th century. So that should definitely be counted. Now, you could say, look, here are like repressive and undemocratic things about Cuba, and you can criticize that, but you can also be aware of a larger historical context. 5 years before, you guys were talking about Guatemala earlier. 5 years before the Cuban Revolution, the coup in Guatemala happened. Like, when something like that happens, other left leaders in the region are going to take notice, and that's going to like impact their thinking. It's like, oh shit, like, how are we going to like, we really have to worry, about like if we take power, about like, what the United States is going to do in response. That is going to shift how they govern. And I mean, like, that's not even making a moral claim one way or the other about like any of those decisions. I mean, that's just that just is part of the historical context for understanding how that comes about.
Yeah, man. I mean, the Cuba stuff, it's just like, it's very, very clear. And this is one of now two, and maybe we'll just make this a regular part of the post game, which is somebody drinking a beer and talking about how great Cuba is and how much the United States sucks, which is going to be a regular segment for reckoning.
But
there's a couple things.
You have to find two or three of us so we can alternate.